All right, it's 9:05. Let's get this meeting started. This is the March 15th occurrence of the Istio Combined Work Group meeting. And first up, we have Jessica.
Yes, can I start?
Please.
Okay, so recently we removed injecting label Istio rev, which was injecting the revision of control plane to sidecar proxies and gateways. Currently, this label is still injected in the default gateways, but it's no longer injected to gateways deployed with gateway injection and to sidecars. In case of sidecars, it's injected as an annotation. So revision can be written in some components from a label, in other from an annotation, and also that annotation in sidecar is a JSON, so it requires some regular expression to parse this. And our goal is to collect revision together with metrics to be able to split metrics which belongs to a given revision. And the first use case is when you have canary deployment, having a revision label in metrics allows to, first of all, fetch metrics for a given revision, so you can see how a given revision performs. And you can also display graph of applications in Kiali, which are connected to a given revision. And what's more, we at Red Hat use revisions for our multi-tenancy implementation. So when users use cluster-wide OpenShift monitoring, which is Prometheus operator under the hood, and single Kiali for multiple Istio control planes, it would allow to narrow query to fetch metrics for a given control plane, for a given revision. And this is the use case. Yes, John, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think the use cases obviously makes a lot of sense. It's the big issue with this was the whole label selector issue, which I know you're familiar with.
Yeah.
Would it be solved if we just did an annotation instead of a label? Is it that simple, or is there some reason?
Yes, annotation also would work for me, but my goal is to find the same annotation or the same label for all proxies, because currently it's inconsistent, and only sidecar proxies have status annotation, and gateway injection template does not include this annotation. And what about default gateways, or what about zTunnel later?
Yeah, so I didn't mean necessarily that status annotation. Well, just first of all, to clarify, I think anything using injection will have that, but there you can have a gateway without injection, so that would not have it. And obviously zTunnel and stuff wouldn't have the injection label. But I think we could add a new annotation that's like istio.io/rev. Basically exactly what we had before, but an annotation instead of a label. So we avoid the issue.
Yeah.
I kind of disagree with you, John, because with Gamma API, you have services who will basically service V1, service V2. You know how destination role is, subsets are replaced, and services have a selector. So in order to select V1, you will need to have a label with V1, as far as I know.
Yeah, but why are you selecting the revision of Istio though?
Oh, not revision of Istio. I thought you mean revision of the application, not revision.
Oh, no. The application can have whatever labels they want. We're just talking about the understanding what revision was used.
Yes, there are two revisions.
Yeah, that one. Yeah, I understand what you're saying now.
I think, Costin, you meant the canonical revision label, right?
Yeah, okay. So, but for Istio, what do you mean? What will be the version? I mean, do you really want a revision of Istio, or do you want a tenant ID? Really? I mean, do you care is this your 117.3, or do you care that it's
actually the value doesn't matter, because I only care what will be. I would like to collect revision, exactly how I configure revision in the control plane. It doesn't matter what the value is. I don't.
It kind of matters the use case, because if your use case is to know what version, particular 117, 118. That's one use case. If the use case is you're using one Istio per tenant and you are using revision names to identify tenants, you are not actually collecting revision. Revision is just implementation detail. You are collecting the tenant ID. This is a very different use case, and it's actually a very important use case, because a lot of people have a use case for a tenant ID, which could be encoded, of course, in revisions, but it's also kind of an independent concept. You may not even have an Istio revision. It may be a fully multi-tenant Istio, or it can be an out-of-process Istio, or it can be anything.
Yes, but currently, does Istio support multi-tenancy somehow? Currently, does it contain? Does it have a tenant ID? I didn't know about this.
So we do have quite a few, not one. I mean, we have Mesh ID. We have a few of them. There are some vendors that implement it as one Istio per tenant, which is effectively Istio revision per tenant. There are vendors that implement it in other ways. I mean, Google. I mean, there are many ways to implement it, but in general, the concept is that it's a tenant, not necessarily a revision in the sense of versioning. There are different concepts. I mean, yes, they both use the same thing, but it's not the same, and it's better to expose what we mean. Anyway, sorry, John.
Yeah, okay, understand. So I think that this will be our concern, how we'll handle this, but annotation Istio IORF sounds great to me, and I think it would work. It should fit well to the first use case, which is canary deployment and observability of different revisions. The second case, okay, I agree that this may be not clear enough for everyone, but this is how we handle multi-tenancy. So we rely on revisions plus namespace and.
No, but the problem is we got into a lot of troubles by kind of abusing words and inventing more and more IDs for the same thing. We have canonical service ID, we have mesh ID, we have a lot of identifiers. I don't have a problem with putting something in. I have a problem with conflating revision, which we typically use for upgrade, with multi-tenant, because they got conflated and we'll get into a lot of troubles if we keep doing it. I mean, Mitch has seen the call. He has a lot of docs, and once we have a tag, we have a lot of concept around using revision and tags for upgrading. And yes, revision are also used for multi-tenant, but let's be clear: if you want a tenant ID, call it tenant ID. Have a naming conventions for each revision. It's identical with the tenant ID or whatever you want. But conceptually, the label should not be ref, because it's confusing for users, confusing for everyone. I mean, if you do upgrade, what you're going to do is revision 117 tenant 1 gets complicated.
Actually, we hide these details and users don't work with this directly. This is we use our operator. This is done under the hood. We understand how it works and so on. So I didn't care too much about this, because in our case it's really hidden from users.
You're not
on the other hand, Istio does not support multi-tenancy explicitly, so I think it doesn't conflict. And the first use case is also very important. And as far as this works, it should be okay.
No, it's okay for you, but a lot of other vendors use tenancy. I mean, tenancy is used. It's not a concept that is specific to this use case. That's why I want to make sure we do it. Right. Anyway, that was my comment. You guys.
Yeah, we do. I mean, if someone wants, like, they say I want the tenant ID injected, and they could even make up what that means. We do have ways to just inject arbitrary annotations to everything. So I think it's pretty flexible to support that use case already. The one difference would be that, well, you could still do it. I was thinking you wouldn't have it on all the Z tunnels and Istio and stuff, but all those also support ways to set annotations. So I think that for the art general case, if I want to put some annotation on everything and it has X value, no matter what it is, we should be able to support it. You actually might even be able to do the revision correctly today, just using that existing API. I think for revision, it's common enough use case that it's probably warrants being there by default for everyone. But it might even be possible of using the existing APIs.
So I had a question about this. You guys are talking about setting this as an annotation. Are you expecting to do any queries against this at all? Like use this as a kind of a selector or anything like that? Or is it this just for like you scrape all of the pods and then try and figure out which ones are attached to a mesh?
I was only thinking about Prometheus.
Okay.
This is only use case.
Okay, and so in that case, it doesn't matter that annotations aren't like indexed in etcd. That was the main question I had. Is just if anybody's going to be running queries on this at all using etcd, like adding a listener or something like that, this would kind of be an awkward way to do that. It'd be better to keep it as a label. But yeah, if it's only for making sure that you can query it in Prometheus or some other kind of third-party thing, I don't think it's a problem.
Yeah, we used to do that, Stuart, and obviously there's benefits of doing it that way. The issue we ran into is that we have tags. And so what would happen is user would put the revision label and say, I want tag X, and then it would be overwritten with the actual revision. And then on their deployment, they would have matched labels, the revision equals tag. So now the pod doesn't match the deployment, and Kubernetes just infinitely loops spinning up new pods. So suddenly you have like 10,000 pods.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's what we're trying to avoid. It's kind of a niche edge case that our solution was to remove the label. So now the solution to get some of that back is to put it in annotation.
That's fair. I was just making sure that like the use case here matches the actual functionality available.
Yeah, for Prometheus, it doesn't matter, I think, which one it's in. For kubectl queries, if it's just for debugging, it's not terrible that you have to do the annotation. Like you can filter by annotation client side, right?
Yeah.
Ideal, but I don't.
If you have to write a controller on it or something like that, it becomes kind of a pain in the ass just because you have to basically get every pod in the cluster, which is a pretty heavy load on the API server, and then filter by annotation in your code, which is doable. Like it's not an impossible task. It does make things very inefficient, but I don't think that's a problem in this case. So no worries.
So I have a few comments and questions. I love this idea. I'm a little bit surprised it doesn't already exist. So thank you, Jacek, for pushing this. This is going to be really important for upgrades, particularly like when you upgrade to a new version, you should be able to compare the health of the new version to the old version. Couple things is there are two parts to a revision, right? There's what the user specifies, which could be a tag or a revision, or it could be nothing in the case of default revisions. And then there's the actual selected revision. Does that initial input already get logged to or annotated in metrics in Prometheus?
I think the answer is sometimes, because Prometheus will put, as far as I know, any labels on a pod, it will stick in the metric.
Okay.
And so if you happen to select the revision by label, then it would be there. But you can also select it by namespace, right?
Okay.
So it's a bit confusing in that regard for Prometheus, but that's also hopefully an expectation of how Prometheus works for users.
So I would like to see a metric also for the user input. And the use case is effectively, I've got, let's say, 50 tags in a cluster and I'm upgrading them one at a time. I want to watch a particular tag after it's been upgraded. I don't necessarily want to watch the whole revision, all of the pods that are on that upgraded version. I want to watch the ones that I just upgraded and see how they're performing in response to the upgrade. So it's a little bit of scope creep, but if we could have the indicated revision as well as the selected revision for metrics, that would open up a lot of great possibilities for upgrade failure detection, automated rollback, Costa, and this is a lot of the stuff that you've been pushing for us to include over the last few months. It would enable a lot. And then the other, just a tiny thing that I left in the comment there, istio.io/rev is already pretty loaded. I'm wondering if a more explicit terminology like selected revision to indicate this is not what the user indicated, but rather given all of the rules including defaulting, and we've talked about maybe some fallback rules being added in the case of ambient. This is the revision it ended up with, not necessarily what the user indicated.
Mitch, I think that the selected revision, you'll be able to scrape selected revision by scraping label istio.io/rev, because this is the selected revision. If user specified this label, so this could be scraped to select select the revision, and the actual revision will be the annotation. But names may be.
So I guess all I'm asking is that we get explicit on each of those and consistent across everything we do. Whether it's, and maybe selected revision is not particularly clear, but like indicated revision versus actual revision or something along those lines. And then that we use those everywhere, whether it's sidecars or gateways or the new Z tunnel or anything like that, that you be able to look at anything Istio does and be able to use those two attributes of telemetry. I don't really care if the particular Kubernetes objects are consistent. What I care is that Prometheus is consistent on those two values.
Mitch, I don't disagree with you. I mean, if it's versions that you mean, I completely agree with you. If it's how they are using it as a tenant ID, I completely disagree. I mean, we should not mix version 117, 118 for upgrade rollbacks with a tenant ID.
No, this has nothing to do with tenant IDs.
But that's his use case. I mean, they are using it apparently for tenant, if I understand correctly. So
I mean, people can choose to use tags for whatever purpose they would like. For the sake of our discussion, we're talking about using them for upgrades. You would use a tag to describe a discrete set of objects that get upgraded collectively together.
And let's keep it for this, I mean, for version identification, because then it's becoming extremely confusing if people start using tags arbitrarily for tenants, which is actually a valid use case, and I know people who do it, because then all the tools that we write with the assumptions that it will be V1 and V2 will suddenly be customer 1, customer 2, customer 3, and it's messing up a lot of assumptions and APIs and semantics.
So I don't think that we require that users equivocate tags with version 1 and version 2. Instead, like I could see, you can partition your failure domains for upgrade any way you like. And across tenant boundaries is a very reasonable way to partition failure domains.
My point is, we should have some concept of upgrade and rollback, and we have a concept of tenant. Yes, you can use arbitrary. With Istio, you can do absolutely anything. There are strings that you can interpret in any way, and you can do whatever you want. But in order to be sane and to have kind of an operable and maintainable system, you should not mix things that are not related and create a spaghetti of strings, basically. That's my concern with this whole thing.
Certainly, I wouldn't want to allow any concept of tenant ID to creep into the concept of tag that we have and document. But I don't think that's what Jacek is proposing here. As for having a first-class concept of tenant, Costin, I know you've taken a swing at this a number of times throughout the lifespan of Istio. I would be interested in seeing a proposal. I think there could be a lot of value there. It's been very difficult to move forward in the past.
Well, you don't need a proposal because there are, as you know, several implementation of multi-tenant Istio already in the place. Right. I mean, it's from Google, from several other companies. So it's a kind of moot point, and pretty much because they are injection-based today, because that's how we are operating, they are obviously using the only things that they have, which is revision.
Yeah.
And they indicate tenant, everyone indicate tenant in a different way. So if we introduce this change, and I completely agree with it, we should be clear about separating them and have a clear string that is not Istio or rev and all the loops and concept problems.
I agree. I would hesitate to make that Jacek's responsibility. It seems orthogonal to this proposal.
I could handle this. This is not a problem.
Okay.
It looks pretty easy. But first of all, Mitch, answering your request, I think we could. At the beginning, I just wanted to read somehow actual revision. So maybe to cover also what you requested, indicated revision and actual revision. We could maybe we could use annotation Istio actual revision at the beginning, and if necessary in the future, if there will be a use case, we could then add Istio indicated revision. John, Costin, do you agree, or anyone else?
I'm on board for the target revision for sure, the original use case. Mitch's use case, I'm not against it necessarily, but I'm not fully sure I understand why it's useful, and it's actually much harder to implement. Like today, Istio actually doesn't know what tag was requested. It knows what revision, obviously, because Istio has a static revision assigned to it.
Is Istio reporting the telemetry?
No, Istio is not, but Istio is the one injecting the annotation there.
Right. So I guess I don't really care about the annotations. What I care about is what comes out on telemetry. So
but the annotation is what drives the telemetry, though.
So if, like, for instance, we've already got label istio.io/rev where the user can indicate things. There's also the namespace problem. Okay, I see that I'm introducing complexity there.
Okay,
I'll think about how we be able to do that.
Okay, so Istio rev annotation. Do we agree? It will be an actual revision.
So I would not use istio.io/rev as the name, but we can talk about adding only one annotation for this proposal. We just need a name that is clearly separate from the existing use of istio.io/rev.
Okay, we can also talk about this in pull request.
Yeah, we can bike shed somewhere else.
Yeah, I'm fine with this for sure. I don't have a strong opinion on the name, so whatever the majority votes or whatever. Either one's fine. Annotation's good.
Yeah, same here. I have only a strong opinion about Istio rev. Don't use it. Anything else, happy to bike share with the rest of everyone. But as long as we confirm that you're not using it for tenant, and if you use it for tenant, please introduce two names.
Okay, if it comes to the tenant annotation, I didn't think about this at the beginning, but if you don't mind to add annotation Istio tenant or mesh ID, that would be great for us.
Annotations are cheap, so you can introduce two annotation. Labels are expensive, annotations are cheap. So if it's annotation, I don't think it's a problem if you introduce a second annotation, if that's your use case. I mean, if you are using it to identify different customers, different users, then tenant is a proper term. Okay,
awesome. This would be great for us. I didn't know that we can add something like this, but if we can, that's great. I see a hand.
Yeah, Asad. So I joined late, but if the objective is to get the revision in Prometheus for observability purpose, container metadata, that is image ID or image version, right? Those already have the version available. Will that serve the objective? Yeah, probably you can ignore my input if I didn't understand the objective correctly.
No,
Interesting.
You're right, Puru, but there's a subtle distinction between version and revision. For instance, if you want to change some of the parameters on your sidecar or in the future on your waypoint gateways, you would need to create a different revision of Istio. That might share the same version as the existing revision, but they would have two distinct sets of parameters that they're using for running Envoy. Often they are used to represent version, so it's totally understandable that they're like 90% similar, but not quite the same.
Wait, so you want to capture the control plane version the proxy is using, right? Not the proxy itself's version.
Again, we're not capturing the version of anything. We're capturing the revision.
The revision, but it's the revision of the control plane, not the proxy.
The revision of the control plane and the revision of the proxy are the same thing. They are not permitted to differ.
They can
Well,
differ, right?
they can be different. To your point, right? Because you might be pointing to a newer control plane, but your data plane hasn't been updated yet.
Okay.
Yes, but I think it's still about. We shouldn't distinct this. If we want to collect metrics per revision,
That's why I was asking you, what are you trying to collect? Are you trying to collect the control plane revision or the data plane revision?
So Lynn, when you perform an upgrade, you don't ever redirect proxies to a new version of the control plane. You create new proxies which point to the new control plane, and that's how revision is always consistent between control plane and data plane.
But that is not enforced or not guardrailed in any sense, right? So the data plane just discovers control plane based on a FQDN, and if it is the version which specific version of the control plane that proxy connects to can be changing. So maybe we should introduce a guardrail there if we implicitly expect that.
There are two modes. Oh, sorry.
So the way that you would do what you're talking about, where the version of the control plane has changed, would be by editing a revision. Basically saying revision X used to be 117, now revision X is 118. We don't recommend that our users do that. They are capable of doing that. But in that case, the revision still stays the same. The revision has not changed. What has changed is the version of the control plane that's running. So using this revision label would still stay consistent between both control and data plane. There are plenty of good reasons that we ask users not to do that, but I'm sure some still do.
And that's called a tag mostly. I mean, you can call it canary code, or it's the difference between tag, which is again something that got multiplexed into Istio WG, which is even more confusing. Good news is that with ambient, most of it is going away because we are no longer tied to injection. We use Istio WG and labels specifically because that's the only way to tie into the webhook injector.
To be clear, none of this is going away in ambient. We've already had a design doc proposed and approved that is moving revisions and tags forward completely from ambient, or into ambient rather.
Well, I would say labels are no longer needed, and the per node doesn't. I mean, zTunnel definitely cannot do this because it's per node and cannot connect to multiple revisions. So that's for
true.
gateways only and waypoints. It's still, I'm not sure if it's fully approved and it's the only option that will be available. But yeah, it may be one of the options.
Okay, thank you very much. I don't have any other question. I think we have conclusion. Thanks.
All right, the next one is going to ask me to discuss this on his behalf since he's not here. So it's not my proposal, I'm just presenting it. So let me pull up actually his message he sent me. He had more context there. Make sure I'm fully explaining it. Yeah, so the idea was today we have Envoy Filter, but Envoy Filter doesn't necessarily support all the use cases for some of the more bespoke customization that we want. So the proposal is to add basically like a Kubernetes mutating webhook, but for XDS. So instead of defining an Envoy filter, you say, send all the XDS through the service, it will mutate it, send it back, and do kind of arbitrary modifications. The idea is that this would be more flexible and get through some of the limitations of Envoy filter. Some examples were supporting things like MySQL and Redis protocols. It's hard to do it in Envoy filter. The proto merging in Envoy filter has some limitations. So that's the general proposal. Discuss.
I guess you know what I want to say, so I probably will not even spend the time.
I think it would be useful to say it.
The requirement is not bad. I mean, I don't think it's a bad idea to have a better thing than envoy filter. Envoy filter is probably the worst thing that we have as an API. But anything that is doing patching, and it seems, I mean, I want to look at the concrete proposal. I mean, if it's proposing envoy filter on steroids, basically, or kind of twice as bad, obviously, it will probably be a hard sell. But if it's something where it's far more restricted, and there's some discussion in envoy gateway to have a way to specify envoy filters to some sort of, for a specific listener, add this filter, not patch, but clear semantics that I want a session filter for post X. That's not a bad idea, and it could be achieved through XDS Federation, which we kind of support, which is at RPC as well. So I think the devil is in the detail. I'm not. I don't think it's.
Yeah, I think it's the opposite. It's the even more flexible, not less flexible.
Yeah,
so I believe the idea would be that all XDS. Well, I'm sure you can probably scope it and say I only want listeners or whatever, but the XDS all gets sent to a gRPC server like a mutating webhook, and it can send a patch, an arbitrary patch back or something.
Yeah, I suspect that's the case, and that's very problematic. I suspect everyone would agree, or many people would agree with it. But having a federation-based mechanism to, to federate and to send some customization in the form of some configs that could be applied, that's not necessarily bad, and it may allow us to escape the envoy filter hell and patching. But I'm pretty sure, I mean, that's why I want to see the link, because I'm pretty sure it is not proposing reducing the power of envoy filter, but quite the opposite.
Yep, I agree. That's use. And I agree with your concerns. I think it's operationally going to be a performance issue, and I'm a bit hesitant of complete arbitrary XDS modification. We already have envoy filter, which has been a bit of a mess. This just brings us further down that path. So,
but if you
Hey,
can
John.
convince, yeah, sorry, Lynn, go ahead.
Sorry. Did you guys mention webhooks when you presented for Zhonghu, or I heard it wrong?
no, I was just saying that this idea is like a Kubernetes mutating webhook. It's basically a Kubernetes webhook for XDS.
Oh, got you. So it's not under the cover using the webhook. Okay, because yeah, I was very concerned with webhooks in general. Yeah.
Well, it's basically re-implementing webhooks, but in Istio. So any concerns with Kubernetes webhooks, we probably have in this proposal as well.
Got you. Yeah. Okay, cool. I think Greg has the next hand.
Yeah, so are people still, I guess, interacting with this webhook with envoy filters? Are we basically just taking the patching logic out of Istio and putting it in this gRPC server?
I suspect this would be an alternative to envoy filter, not removing envoy filter. So if envoy filter doesn't meet your needs, then you would use this more advanced thing.
Okay, so it's an additional option rather than a straight up replacement.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'll echo John and Costin's concerns here. Like this sounds like we're taking a way that we've already empowered our users to shoot themselves in the foot repeatedly and converting it into a cannon. The extensions like this or expandability, customizability like this, I don't think belongs as a first-class item in the product. However, we've discussed in the ambient working group like library level extensions, making the Istio code base such that if they wanted to add their own logic on top of XDS generation, they can build their own Istio with a little bit of custom code. Should be an easy to maintain fork. I would be in favor of that level of extensibility, but not runtime level extensibility for all of XDS.
We did actually have this in the past. and we removed it because there was a lot of issues that it was causing. That's not to say it can't be done, but the more granular you have it, the more tricky it is to maintain. Like I think we had an interface like on filter chain or something. It's like, well, we changed what a filter chain means now, right? We refactored the XDS, and so what does that mean anymore? If it's on something like here's a on XDS blob, and you just get the blob and can do whatever you want, it's a bit different. Although it does make some of the caching work we've done harder. I would agree, though, in general, that for this type of, if your use case is so advanced that Envoy filter doesn't satisfy it, and you still want to do the extensibility, then a customized EastGD is not a bad option. How we expose that, we'd have to see, I guess, the details of the use cases.
Yeah, can we ask Zonghu to share his user case?
He did share a few use cases with me. Let me just copy these in here so it's not just me reading off a Slack message. But he doesn't mind me sharing this message. I don't think it has anything of it at all. Yeah, so I mentioned most of these, but
Thank you. So if this is in addition to Envoy filter, maybe if he's really interested in this, maybe he could give us an initial prototype, because this could be interesting for people who wants to do things that Envoy filter couldn't fit, and it's an optional feature, right? So it's not going to be impact Istio mainstream.
I think it's one of those viral things that you can't go back from. Like Kubernetes webhooks. I mean, you were saying that Kubernetes webhooks were kind of a mess, right? This is like webhook for Istio.
Yeah, I was just thinking it's not enabled for everybody, right? Unless people
sure,
needs
but
it.
I mean, that's true for almost all features. That doesn't mean it doesn't cause a headache for everything, right?
So why is Istio so complicated? Because it has 500 options that are all off by default or not enabled by anyone, and nobody really knows how the combination of them works. And the user who accidentally find about an option and thinks they know what it is, they don't really realize how much damage they do to themselves. I mean, we have some duty to kind of protect the users to some extent from foot cannons.
So maybe one way to look at this is, similar as the extension, right? Yuval was proposing for Z-tunnel on the ambient meeting, right? It's looking at, do we have any other people in the community who is also interested in this type of extension? And if we have more than one vendor, right, it would make more sense to look into.
To be honest, I think that would point us to doing Mitch's proposal of having library extensions. I don't think I will ever feel comfortable with this proposal. I don't want to unilaterally shut anything down, and obviously I can be overridden by other people's opinions, but I just don't ever see myself being convinced that this is something we should do personally. So.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So Mitch, maybe I missed your proposal on the library. If you can put a link in the history here, maybe we can look at that offline too.
No, it was just on the chat. It was exactly the same as the Z-tunnel proposal, where we have extension points that someone can build their own Istio with some customizations, basically.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah. Sorry, I missed that.
Instead of, it's basically in customized code plugin rather than gRPC webhook plugin type thing.
Yeah,
which is already kind of possible.
Essentially, this is just like a guide for anyone who wants to fork IstioD or Z-tunnel. Like, here's where to put your code, and we'll keep this API more or less consistent from one version to the next. No really strong guarantees or anything like that. It's just makes it easier for those who want to have a custom build of our resources.
2 points I want to make. First of all, answering Lynn's question about the interest from other vendors. I suspect federation interest, at least Google will definitely have some interest in that. Also interest in reducing the use of envoy filters if we move to a proposal with Saner. I saw that Kit also had a +1 on federation, so I don't think there will be objections to or lack of interest to replacing envoy filters with something that is more sanitized and is based on federation. The other point I want to make, I mentioned before this proposal, and that the other way to do filtering is to do it on the agent, because that avoids a lot of the problems with sending the entire request. I mean, it gets anyways the entire traffic. So if someone would want to do this kind of extension, it may be much better off to do it by providing an extension point in the agent itself, but that's a different story.
I was going to echo the same thing, Costin, that if we didn't have to worry about ambient, wouldn't agent be the place to just be doing this instead?
Even in ambient, I know I haven't convinced yet, John, that we should have an agent as well in the CNI, but for a
You don't
separate
even really need
container.
an agent, right? I mean, you could just have a general proxy, like an XDS proxy that sits in between. Like you could run as a sidecar to Istio D. You don't even need Istio changes to do that.
Yes, that's kind of it. But being per node, it avoids some of the overheads and problems. And the agent is doing this already, and we want the agent for DNS and other purposes. That's what I'm trying to convince you.
Yeah, I mean, the agent may be a nice spot to put it, but if you just have like some sort of proxy that all the clients connect to, and then they like the XDS relay project that kind of died, but well, it was doing other things really, but same concept. You can actually do that today with no modifications to Istio, so maybe that's
exactly
the alternative.
A proxy is already possible, and the proxy that is patching some protos, it's probably something that is very generic and could be done today. Yeah. And far more efficient too. No.
Yeah, I think that's probably the best path forward for people who want this type of customization if they're not willing to do like Istio custom build type thing. If there is demand in custom build being easier with some interfaces, we can try and scope that out. But it would be helpful for people that do have that demand to be a bit more specific about what exactly they want to customize, because it's hard to, build out these interfaces without having more concrete use cases.
How about combining all those together? I mean, having a proxy that is federating XDS and doing small transformation to it. Maybe a separate repository or some place where it doesn't fix the entire Istio.
Yeah, I mean, I'm fine with anyone doing whatever they want in a separate repository. I did have a question on the federation, though. What is the benefit of federation to add a filter that isn't already solved by Envoy filter?
The problem with Envoy filter is patch based. With federation, if it's well, you could argue that federation is also sort of patch.
Right. You said you want to insert a filter, right? Like you can insert a filter with Envoy filter.
Yes, that's true. That's true. But again, the point is that you can restrict a bit what is the format, and with federation, it's basically the information you get. It's basically you can remove some of the power of Envoy filter. It can be specific points and specific extensions and.
Yeah, I would just think that's maybe something built on top of Istio, and then.
No, I agree.
Yeah.
Federation, it's very close. I mean, I was thinking exactly similar to what proxies are doing. It's basically taking multiple configuration streams, doing some manipulation, which can be a bit more controlled than patch, and generating the output on the other side instead of send request to someone and get back the response patched and then send. Anyway, I think we at least we are here in agreement mostly.
Okay, sounds good. I think you're next, Mitch.
Yep. So last thing on the agenda here is just a public service announcement. The CNCF CLA will be required soon. I am targeting the end of this week. it is already running on your pull request. So actually, I'll take over the share real quick just to be really explicit so that everyone sees what they need to do here. I just grabbed a random pull request that was recently open. Looks like this is Rama's. Down here within the checks, you should see an easy CLA mark. You might have X's if you have not, you or your corporation has not signed the easy CLA. So these are already running today, but we're not requiring them for merge yet. They will be required for merge shortly. So if you're seeing X's, please take the time to sign the easy CLA so that your pull requests will continue to be merged once we turn on branch protection for this. Also, as we turn on branch protection for easy CLA, we will be turning off branch protection for the Google CLA. John?
Oops, sorry, muted. Just a small question. Do you know if there's any way that we can easily query, like, for all the failures across Istio, just to give people a heads up? I don't know of any way, but if you do, that might be nice. It's certainly not a blocker. Just if not, I'll just do it manually.
I think that data is probably in the Istio bots database, but that's Googler access only.
The Istio
It's probably not there based on how it works, but just as brief guess. I can maybe take a look, but I think it's also, there's not that many PR, so I've just been pinging people and they'll quickly learn once it's required. So
yep.
Also,
I think
Mitch,
the only
is
one I
there,
know for sure is Jacob that I've seen.
yeah, I just sent him a message. So
Mitch, is there a standalone link that we can make an announcement so that folks can sign up before they submit a PR?
Oh, sorry. Can you explain?
So what I mean is typically I see this after I already submitted a PR and it fails. Is there a link that we can send to folks in announcements, in the Slack announcements, and say, please go sign this?
Mitch already sent it, right?
Yep.
A while back.
Ah, okay.
I could put another one there. Like that was for enabling easy CLA, or which is the same as CNCF CLA. We could send out another one saying like, hey, if you haven't done this, it's about to be required.
I think that's worthwhile just so the community gets it.
I'd be happy to do that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. That's it for me.
All right. Does anyone else have topics to discuss? Going once, going twice, going 3 times. If not, I'll see you most of you in the next meeting. Okay. Later, folks.